A.2.7. Why do anarchists argue for self-liberation? Liberty by its very nature cannot be given. An individual cannot be freed by another, but must break his or her own chains through their own effort. Of course, self-effort can also be part of collective action, and in many cases it has to be in order to attain its ends. As Emma Goldman points out, open quote, history tells us that every oppressed class or group of individual gained true liberation from its masters by its own efforts, end quote. This is because anarchists recognize that hierarchical systems, like any social relationship, shapes those subject to them. As Bookchin argued, open quote, class societies organize our psychic structures for command or obedience, end quote. This means that people internalize the values of hierarchical and class society, and as such, open quote, the state is not merely a constellation of bureaucratic and coercive institutions. It is also a state of mind, an instilled mentality for ordering reality. Its capacity to rule by brute force has always been limited. Without a high degree of cooperation from even the most victimized classes of society, such as chattel slaves and serfs, its authority would eventually dissipate. Awe and apathy in the face of state power are products of social conditioning that renders this very power possible, end quote. Self-liberation is the means by which we break down both internal and external chains, freeing ourselves mentally as well as physically. Anarchists have long argued that people can only free themselves by their own actions. The various methods anarchists suggest to aid this process will be discussed in Section J, What Do Anarchists Do?, and will not be discussed here. However, these methods all involve people organizing themselves, setting their own agendas, and acting in ways that empower them and eliminate their dependence on leaders to do things for them. Anarchism is based on people acting for themselves, performing what anarchists call direct action. See Section J.2 for details. Direct action has an empowering and liberating effect on those involved in it. Self-activity is the means by which the creativity, initiative, imagination, and critical thought of those subjected to authority can be developed. It is the means by which society can be changed. As Enrico Malatesta pointed out, open quote, between man and his social environment, there is a reciprocal action. Men make society what it is, and society makes men what they are, and the result is, therefore, a kind of vicious circle. To transform society, men and women must be changed, and to transform men, society must be changed. Fortunately, existing society has not been created by the inspired will of a dominating class, which has succeeded in reducing all its subject to passive and unconscious instruments of its interests. It is the result of 1,000 internecine struggles, of 1,000 human and natural factors. From this possibility of progress, we must take advantage of all the means, all the possibilities and the opportunities that the present environment allows us to act on our fellow men and women, and to develop their consciences and their demands, to claim and to impose those major social transformations which are possible and which effectively serve to open the way to further advances later. We must seek to get all the people to make demands and impose itself and take for itself all the improvements and freedoms it desires as and when it reaches the state of wanting them, and the power to demand them. We must push the people to want always more and to increase its pressures on the ruling elite until it has achieved complete emancipation, end quote. Society, while shaping all individuals, is also created by them through their actions, thoughts, and ideals. Challenging institutions that limit one's freedom is mentally liberating, as it sets in motion the process of questioning authoritarian relationships in general. This process gives us insight into how society works, changing our ideas and creating new ideals. To quote Emma Goldman again, open quote, true emancipation begins in woman's soul, end quote. And in a man's too, we might add. It is only here that we can, open quote, begin our inner regeneration, cutting loose from the weight of prejudices, traditions, and customs, end quote. But this process must be self-directed, for as Max Stirner notes, open quote, the man who is set free is nothing but a freed man, a dog dragging a piece of chain with him, end quote. By changing the world, even in a small way, we change ourselves. In an interview during the Spanish Revolution, the Spanish anarchist militant Giroudi said, open quote, "We have a new world in our hearts," end quote. Only self-activity and self-liberation allows us to create such a vision and gives us the confidence to try to actualize it in the real world. Anarchists, however, do not think that self-liberation must wait for the future after the glorious revolution. The personal is political, and given the nature of society, how we act in the here and now will influence the future of our society and our lives. Therefore, even in pre-anarchist society, anarchists try to create, as Bakunin puts it, open quote, "not only the ideas, but also the facts of the future itself," end quote. We can do so by creating alternative social relationships and organizations, acting as free people in a non-free society. Only by our actions in the here and now can we lay the foundation of a free society. Moreover, this process of self-liberation goes on all the time. Open quote, "Subordinates of all kind exercise their capacity for critical self-reflection every day. That is why masters are thwarted, frustrated, and sometimes overthrown. But unless masters are overthrown, unless subordinates engage in political activity, no amount of critical reflection will end their subjection and bring them freedom," end quote. Anarchists aim to encourage these tendencies in everyday life, to reject, resist, and thwart authority, and bring them to their logical conclusion: a society of free individuals cooperating as equals in free, self-managed associations. Without this process of critical self-reflection, resistance, and self-liberation, a free society is impossible. Thus, for anarchists, anarchism comes from the natural resistance of subordinated people striving to act as free individuals within a hierarchical world. This process of resistance is called by many anarchists the class struggle, as it is working class people who are generally the most subordinated group within society, or more generally, social struggle. It is this everyday resistance to authority in all its forms and the desire for freedom which is the key to the anarchist revolution. It is for this reason that, open quote, "anarchists emphasize over and over that the class struggle provides the only means for the workers and other oppressed groups to achieve control over their destiny," end quote. Revolution is a process, not an event, and every spontaneous revolutionary action usually results from and is based upon the patient work of many years of organization and education by people with utopian ideas. The process of creating the new world in the shell of the old, to use another IWW expression, by building alternative institutions and relationships is but one component of what must be a long tradition of revolutionary commitment and militancy. As Malatesta made clear, open quote, "To encourage popular organizations of all kinds is the logical consequence of our basic ideas, and should therefore be an integral part of our program. Anarchists do not want to emancipate the people. We want the people to emancipate themselves. We want the new way of life to emerge from the body of the people and correspond to the state of their development and advance as they advance," end quote. Unless a process of self-emancipation occurs, a free society is impossible. Only when individuals free themselves, both materially by abolishing the state and capitalism, and intellectually by freeing themselves of submissive attitudes towards authority, can a free society be possible. We should not forget that capitalist and state power, to a great extent, is power over the mind of those subject to them, backed up, of course, with sizable force if the mental domination fails and people start rebelling and resisting. In effect, a spiritual power, as the ideas of the ruling class dominate society and permeate the minds of the oppressed. As long as this holds, the working class will acquiesce to authority, oppression, and exploitation as the normal condition of life. Minds submissive to the doctrines and positions of their masters cannot hope to win freedom, to revolt and fight. Thus, the oppressed must overcome the mental domination of the existing system before they can throw off its yoke. And anarchists argue direct action is the means of doing both. See sections J.2 and J.4. Capitalism and statism must be beaten spiritually and theoretically before it is beaten materially. Many anarchists call this mental liberation class consciousness. See section B.7.4. And self-liberation through struggle against oppression is the only way this can be done. Thus, anarchists encourage, to use Kropotkin's term, the spirit of revolt. Self-liberation is a product of struggle, of self-organization, solidarity, and direct action. Direct action is the means of creating anarchists, free people, and so, open quote, anarchists have always advised taking an active part in those workers' organizations which carry on the direct struggle of labor against capital and its protector, the state, end quote. This is because, open quote, such a struggle, better than any indirect means, permits the worker to obtain some temporary improvements in the present conditions of work while it opens his or her eyes to the evil that is done by capitalism and the state that supports it, and wakes up his or her thoughts concerning the possibility of organizing consumption, production, and exchange without the intervention of the capitalist and the state, end quote. That is, see the possibility of a free society. Kropotkin, like many anarchists, pointed to the syndicalist and trade union movements as a means of developing libertarian ideas within existing society, although he, like most anarchists, do not limit anarchist activity exclusively to them. Indeed, any movement which, open quote, permits the working men and women to realize their solidarity and to feel the community of their interests prepares the way for these conceptions, end quote, of communist anarchism, i.e., the overcoming the spiritual domination of existing society within the minds of the oppressed. For anarchists, in the words of a Scottish anarchist militant, the, open quote, history of human progress is seen as the history of rebellion and disobedience, with the individual debased by subservience to authority in its many forms and able to retain his or her dignity only through rebellion and disobedience, end quote. This is why anarchists stress self-liberation and self-organization, self-management, and self-activity. Little wonder Bakunin considered rebellion as one of the, open quote, 3 fundamental principles which constitute the essential conditions of all human development, collective or individual, in history, end quote. This is simply because individuals and groups cannot be freed by others, only by themselves. Such rebellion, self-liberation, is the only means by which existing society becomes more libertarian and an anarchist society a possibility.